Hey, Fitheads. Today we talk with Paul Shapiro of the Better Meat Company. And holy crap, this was crazy. If you want to be on the right side of the story, the correct side of the future, when they write the history books, you need to listen to this. It's fascinating.
It was crazy. Yeah. It was they do alternative meat alternatives, but a little bit more involved than your typical plant burger, stuff like that.
This was not just an episode like, oh, you should go vegan because animals. It's fascinating to see the parallels between what we're doing now with lab-grown meat and meat alternatives through plants and his mycoprotein, right?
Versus how horrible the animal industry, the slaughter industry is. And, and the comparison of that to back whenever we were killing whales to light our houses, or he even told us about how initially we would farm ice instead of making it. And then when people started making it, it seemed like, I don't know, against God somehow, which sounds absurd now. They called it artificial ice. And we talked a lot. This is a crazy episode because we talk about ice barons, which sounds like absurd.
It's so good. But we've landed on, and Max and I need to find some lab-grown meat to try for all of you because it's the future.
Welcome to Total Fitheads.
Serious fitness for not so serious people.
Hi, Paul. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Allie and Max, so great to be with you both. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I am stoked on this one. Max, you pumped?
Very pumped.
You look pumped. I don't know how many people are watching this as opposed to listening, but Max looks pumped. He's wearing a tank top. He looks like he just got out of the gym. It's like I don't know if he has a license to carry these guns or not, but he looks literally pumped.
Always. Thank you.
His aesthetic is just left the gym. Yes. Always. Yeah.
Slightly sweaty.
Okay. Since I'm vegan, I have to bring it up immediately.
If my arms looked like yours, Max, I'd be wearing a tank top also. Sadly,
that's a good point. I gotta wear Same. We all would. All right. So back to me being a vegan. I'm sorry. I just have to bring it up all the time. So I'm on day 61 on a 60-day challenge going vegan. Yes, thank you. That's exactly what I wanted. And this is why I'm extra stoked to talk to you. So let's just give the fitheads an idea of what you're doing with the Better Meat Company.
Sure, Allie. Well, first, congratulations. That's awesome. Let me I gave you a virtual fist bump. Now I'm going to applaud for you as well.
Oh, wow.
So
thank you.
You should be very pleased. You should be very pleased. So, you're doing a very good thing. Most people are familiar by now with the reality that the planet is not getting any bigger, but our footprint on the planet is getting a lot bigger. Principally, in our footprint is a lot of it comes from our food print, and the primary way that we leave that food print is through the amount of meat that we eat. Because it's just an extremely resource-intensive food. It's a lot of land, a lot of water, a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and more. And of course, a lot of animal cruelty too. And even these facts, though, typically don't change a lot of people's behavior. Like awareness has risen about the problems of factory farming animals, and yet meat demand continues to go up. Now, if people would do what you're doing, Allie, and just be happy to eat plants, that would be awesome. But I think most people want meat. And we need to provide them with the meat experience, just in the same way that I would be thrilled if people wanted to, let's say, turn the lights off more. But most people want illuminated rooms. And so we need to find ways to produce energy without fossil fuels, right? So we need cars that don't run on fossil fuels. We need light that doesn't run from fossil fuels. And we need meat that doesn't come from animals. And that is what we at the Better Meat Co. are seeking to do, is to create the meat experience. And what we do is we use microbial fermentation to essentially recreate the meat experience so that you can enjoy the foods that you love as a meat consumer with a minuscule, tiny fraction of the footprint on animals and on the planet. And they're delicious. And frankly, they're much better for you than conventional meat too.
It sounds so easy.
Well, it is a deep science, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, it's pretty cool what we do. So if you think about like a cow, you feed a cow, and the cow inside of her body is running a fermentation. So inside of the cow's intestinal lining and stomachs is a fermentation. And to oversimplify it, basically you're converting either grass or corn or soy or whatever you're feeding that cow via fermentation into a steak. The problem is that it takes a long time, like 1 to 2 years before you get that steak. And it's a huge amount of land and water and other problems that I enumerated before. So what we do is we take microscopic fungi and we feed them. We feed them byproducts from the potato and corn industries. And they run a fermentation as well within their own bodies. And they produce something that ultimately looks like a steak. But instead of taking more than a year or two to do that, it takes less than one single day. Less than one single day in order to get it. So from the time we inoculate our fermenter until the time we harvest our fermenter is less than 24 hours. And so this is almost miraculous to see how fast we can grow something that really does a great job of mimicking the meat experience, but it's a tiny fraction of the footprint that animal-based meat has. It doesn't have saturated fat or cholesterol. It's high in protein. It's high in iron. So you're getting everything you want from meat without all the bad stuff.
Again, I just feel like, wow, I say it's so easy because it's like, it sounds like, oh, this is the obvious answer. And from this point on, we will all be having that instead of meat, except that's not the case.
Well, we need to scale up. So, we're running a pilot plant here in Sacramento at the Better Meat Co. And so we are partnered with companies like Hormel Foods, the makers of Spam, to provide them with ingredients. But we can't produce millions of pounds yet. And that's our goal. Our goal is to create a facility that is so big that we have fermenters that reach up to the sky, like as big as an office building, and create a massive amount of what we call microprotein in order to flow like a river throughout the food industry so we can reduce humanity's reliance on animals. I really think that if you look, for example, back at how we used to light our homes, it was by slaughtering whales, and we took whale oil and light our homes. And nobody stopped whaling in America because they cared about whales. They stopped because kerosene was invented, and kerosene was a cheaper, more efficient way to light our homes. Nobody stopped whipping horses to force them to carry us around because they cared about the horses. They stopped because we developed better methods of transporting ourselves, mainly in the form of cars. In fact, the car originally was called the horseless carriage. So if you look at even something, let's say like quill pens, where we used to live pluck geese for their quills. And in fact, Thomas Jefferson was such an avid letter writer, he had his own personal flock of geese who they live plucked for his quills. Now, this is torturous, it's animal abuse, but that's how they got quill pens back then. And nobody stopped because they cared about geese. They stopped because metal fountain pens were invented. Well, similarly, I don't think that people are going to move away from meat consumption because they care about animal welfare or because they care about the planet. I wish that would be the case. That was sufficient for me to do it. But I think most people want meat. And so the key for us is to satisfy the meat tooth that many humans have, but do it in a way that does involve animals. And that's what we're seeking to do.
When I cook a slab of chicken, sometimes it's like I feel like I need like a hazmat suit, and I got to wipe down my kitchen 7 times. I wash my hands 11 times and stuff like that. Is there any difference there, or is there an advantage there?
Yeah, Max, there's a huge difference, and I'll tell you why. So the reason why we are warned to treat raw meat like toxic waste is because there are fecal pathogens on it. E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter. These are intestinal pathogens that if we don't cook the crap out of the meat, you're literally cooking the crap out of the meat, it can sicken and possibly even kill you. So this is why, in the supermarket, you're not supposed to put meat next to your other groceries. You're supposed to segregate them in different bags. If it touches your counter, you need to disinfect your counter. If it touches your hands, you need to disinfect your hands. Whereas what we do, you don't have to worry so much about intestinal pathogens because there aren't any intestines at all. We are growing what is essentially a microscopic fungi inside of a sterile environment. So you're more likely to infect it with your hands than it is to infect you. And so, yes, this is great for the environment. Yes, it's great for animal welfare, but it's also better for food safety. And that's one of the key benefits of recreating the meat experience without animals.
Can you eat it raw?
I do. We like to kill it so that you don't have any like flavor activity. So like if you like think about it like this, let's say when you buy an apple, it's still alive and you're eating it raw. But if you let it sit out for too long, it eventually degrades and it's a problem and it changes flavor, it might change color. The same thing here. If you let it sit out for too long, you have that problem. And so we prefer to kill it first. And so it would be similar to, purchasing any pre-cooked material, any pre-cooked food that you might get. But I will tell you, Allie, I do regularly eat it raw and it's delicious. It's a meat-like texture. It doesn't have much flavor. We end up flavoring it, or our customers end up flavoring it to be more like beef or chicken or pork or whatever it is they want it to be like. But we're very proud of the product. And if you ever come to our facility here in Sacramento at the Better Meat Co. Alley, we would welcome you to try it raw too.
So cool. I love it. I mean, I love the idea of it arriving cooked for me too. Then I am one of those people that is very concerned about foodborne illness and doing it wrong. And so the fact that I can't really screw it up is nice.
Yeah, I mean, there's a surprising number of people who are sickened and even killed from foodborne illness in the United States. And most of the time it's coming from fecal pathogens, again, like E. coli or Salmonella, Campylobacter. And that could come from like somebody's hands, maybe somebody in the supply chain. But more than likely, it's coming from animal manure, either manure that contaminated the meat during the slaughter process, or it might have been, sometimes people who get sick from those, like if you hear about like E. coli in spinach, well, spinach don't have intestines. They're not, you're not getting E. coli from the spinach. They fertilize the field with animal manure, and that was on the spinach. Or it was on some human's hand that touched the spinach. So, the key thing to remember, though, is that animal meat is uniquely dangerous when it's raw. And that's why you have, when Consumer Reports tests things like raw chicken breasts, what they find is really high pathogen loads. Oftentimes more than 90% of samples tested have some type of E. coli or Salmonella on them.
You talked about meat tooth. I guess this is just like a subjective thing. Do you think that's real, that humans are really just inherently drawn to having the meat experience, and it's something that we can't separate ourselves from?
Well, I don't know whether we can't. I mean, I'll tell you something, Allie. I have been a vegan for 29 years now. And
fist bump. And
thank you. And I'll also give a plug. My wife, whose name is Toni Okamoto, is a vegan cookbook author, so go check out her books. But I'll tell you, I'm quite happy not to eat meat. I'm quite happy to eat plants, to eat bean and rice burritos and lentil soup and hummus and tofu. Like those foods I'm quite happy to eat them. My experience, though, is that most people want meat. And it's kind of like sugar. Like most people really crave sugar. And they go out and they want that sugar. And so now we're trying to recreate sugar without the glycemic impact by using things like stevia or allulose or other non-glycemic sweeteners. There are even some companies making protein-based sweeteners. But the point is, people generally eat about as much sugar as they can, and they generally eat about as much meat as they can. So if you look at countries like China and India, where they've had expanding middle classes, so people are escaping poverty, which is, of course, fantastic. But one of the very first things that people do when they escape poverty is they start increasing their meat consumption. And so we want people escaping poverty, obviously, but it's just a much bigger environmental footprint. And so even if people in the United States are willing to eat less meat, we eat more meat than any nation on the planet, by the way, on per person basis. But even if we were, you still have to contend with the exploding demand for meat in places like China, India, Brazil, all the places where, frankly, it's going to matter the most in the future because most people will be there. We need to provide some way to satisfy the meat tooth. So I wish that people were happy just to eat plants. I think that would be great. But my experience so far is people want meat. It's kind of like I wish more people would be happy to, for example, walk and to bike more, but people seem to want to drive. A lot of people really want to drive. So let's make cars that don't rely on fossil fuels.
Yeah. And hybrid cars.
Yes, that I can't wait. I would love to drive.
Are you making hybrid meats?
Yes. So, you should make hybrid meats. It's true. We could easily take our ingredients and put them into animal-based meat and reduce the footprints. And frankly, Max, you're hitting a nail on the head because we already do that. So are you guys familiar with Purdue Farms, the major chicken producer? So Purdue Farms makes a product. It's called Purdue Chicken Plus. And we are the plus in that Chicken Plus. So it's a 50-50 nugget. So 50% chicken, 50% plant-based. Every serving of it has a quarter cup of vegetables, but it looks like a regular chicken nugget. It tastes like a regular chicken nugget. And so if you can't get your kids to eat their veggies, you can give them these. And the Food Network named it the best tasting frozen chicken nugget in America. And so think about that. Like the best tasting frozen chicken nugget in America is only 50% chicken. What if we could make all chicken nuggets only 50% chicken? You could use hundreds of millions of fewer animals. You would free up millions of acres. It would be a real amazing advance for the world. So I know you are in half jest on this, but I'll tell you, I actually am a big fan of hybridizing meat, Max. And I think we can do that with hamburgers, hot dogs, sausages, meatballs, fish sticks, and more.
It's like a gateway drug to like sneak it into people's diet, get them comfortable with it, and then boom, no more real animals.
The first hit is free, Howie. Don't worry. The first hit is free.
A part of this, because I was like, oh, this is clearly the answer and it's so easy. I imagine it is not easy for you. Can you talk about some of the counter arguments and why people like knee jerk react to, no, it's not meat?
Yeah, so sure. I mean, some people have what's generally called neophobia, a fear of new things. And so they are, like, hey, listen, we've been slaughtering animals for thousands of years. Let's keep on slaughtering animals for thousands of more years. And that's true. There are some people who really feel that way. They just don't want any type of innovation in their food. And that's fine. They don't have to eat this. If they want to eat in the way that people ate in the 19th century, that's fine. But already, if you look at how most people eat today, virtually nothing that we consume bears almost any relation to the food from which it was domesticated. So if you look at chickens today, we've selectively bred them to grow so big, so fast, that many of them can't even take more than a few steps prior to collapsing underneath their own bulk. They live by the tens of thousands inside of windowless warehouses where they live in their own feces. They never see the light of day until they go onto a slaughter truck, and people don't want to hear about what happens next. So, if you think about how inhumane and unnatural and unsustainable the current methods of meat production are, producing meat without animals seems like a naturally preferable thing to do. Now, of course, some people still will have that neophobia, and that's fine. We don't have to get everybody, but there were many people who were very concerned about switching from horse-drawn carriages to cars. There were a lot of people who were, concerned about even the impact of doing things like digital photography and giving up, like what happens to the entire industry that's based on negatives and dark rooms and chemicals. And in fact, this destroyed Kodak's entire business. It was one of the biggest companies on the planet, and then it went bankrupt because they didn't invest in this innovation. Similarly, it's a very famous story about what happened to Blockbuster once streaming came on. Like all of a sudden, people wanted to do it in this new way. Maybe there's some people who would rather wait hours or days for their photos. Maybe there's some people who would rather go to the video store to get a tape to watch a video. And maybe there's some people who want to keep on slaughtering animals like we have. But I think most people are quite happy to embrace innovation and find better ways to do things. And frankly, I think that many people in the future are going to be grateful. In the same way we're grateful that we don't have to kill whales anymore for lighting our homes, I think many people are going to be grateful that there were pioneers in our era who were leading the way to figure out how to divorce meat from animal slaughter.
You heard it here, folks. Meat is the blockbuster of foods.
Yes, it's the blockbuster in the Kodak. Although, I wouldn't say meat. I'd say slaughter-based meat. Like we'll have a more, yes. We still take photos, we still watch videos, we just do it in a more efficient way. We'll still have the meat experience, but we'll do it in a different way.
Again, it's so easy. It makes sense from here on out. We have it solved.
Very good. Yeah. So if you are interested in learning more, so I wrote a book on the topic. It's called Clean Meat, How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner in the World. And in the book, I chronicle the entrepreneurs and the investors and the scientists who are all racing to bring to market these slaughter-free meats. And so there's lots of different ways to do it. In the same way, there's lots of ways to recreate energy without fossil fuels. Like you've got wind, you've got solar, you've got geothermal, et cetera. Well, there's lots of ways to recreate meat without animals. You can do it by using plants like soybeans or wheat or peas. You can do it by using fungi, which is what we at the Better Meat Co. do. You can even grow animal cells and grow real meat. It's not a meat alternative, not a meat substitute, but grow real actual animal meat outside of the animal. So there's lots of ways to do it. And I presume that there will be some combination of these methods that get mainstreamed. It won't just be one winner in the space. But overall, I think we will continue to enjoy succulent, delicious proteins without so much downside.
Yeah, the lab-grown meat, it seems to be the one that gives people the most knee-jerk reaction to like, wait a minute, but also the most interesting, right? That seems like you could match meat so closely if you're just making it.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's not being sold anywhere in the United States yet, but hopefully it will soon. And, the point is, like, if you look at cheese right now, it already has lab-grown rennet in it. So, it used to be that in order to get cow's milk to curdle, you have to use rennet. And we used to get rennet from cow's intestines. However, around 1990, it became known how to use synthetic biology to produce rennet through bioreactors rather than through animal slaughter. And what ended up happening now is that the vast majority of cheese has this type of bioreactor-produced rennet in it. And so people are already eating it. Like if you eat cheese today, there's a high chance that you're consuming what you would consider lab-grown ingredients in the cheese. There's nothing wrong with them. I mean, even diabetics, when they inject themselves with insulin, they're injecting themselves with a real human insulin that was grown without humans. So, diabetics used to have to get insulin from cow and pig pancreases. But then humans figured out how to synthesize human insulin. And now in bioreactors, we grow actual human insulin. And so diabetics have something that's much purer and that is less likely to create an allergic reaction. And so diabetics today are benefiting from so-called this lab-grown animal product of human insulin that they inject. And these are great. Nobody complains. Like people are thrilled that we have this, or so glad that if you have diabetes that you can use that better insulin. You're glad that if you are eating cheese, that there's no intestines in the cheese, that we can have these better products. And in the future, we will also be producing meat from these same methods.
Well, what's the holdup? Is it public preference or is it big government?
They're hiring.
Big chicken.
It's on their site.
Thank you. Yeah, good point, Ali. We are hiring. So yeah, there's two holdups, Max. So first and foremost is just scale. So the meat industry is gigantic. For decades been consolidated and concentrated into about four major players, and they have operations that are truly the size of cities, and they're just massive. Mm-hmm. And most of the companies in this space are these small startups like the Better Meat Co. that have a couple dozen employees. And so we're trying to scale up. We're trying to bring our products. Even if you look at the biggest companies in the space, companies like Impossible Foods or Beyond Meat, and you combine all of the products that every single startup in this space makes, it's less than 1% of the volume of meat in America. So scale up is just this huge problem. It's a lot of capital expenditure. It's a lot of operating expenditure and so on. In addition, though, there's also government regulations. So the U.S. doesn't even allow for the sale of what's generally called cultivated meat, or meat that's cultivated, real meat that's cultivated without animals. It is on sale in Singapore now, where the regulators have approved it. But the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration do appear poised, from what I can tell by their public mentions of this, to get ready to allow it, because they put out a notice asking for public comment on how they think these foods should be labeled. There's a big question, like, this is meat. Like, meat that is grown from animal cells is meat, and should it be labeled as such? And so, like, if you're allergic to beef or to fish or to crab and you grow this, like, you will be allergic to it because it is actual animal meat. Similarly, like, if you think about ice, how for centuries the only way we had to get ice was out of nature. But we had a big industry that carved out big boulders of ice from frozen lakes and rivers, and we put it on insulated boats, and they shipped them all around the world to people's ice boxes at their homes. And then all of a sudden, we had a way to produce ice via human-made technology.
It's just not natural.
Yeah. Well, that's what they said. It's funny you said, Ali, because there was a whole crusade against it to call it artificial ice. And so the ice barons of the 19th century, and there were barons industry, they railed against what they called artificial ice. And they said, oh, this is unnatural, goes against God. This is something that nobody's ever done. It's going to poison your kids. And of course, now we all have artificial ice makers in our homes. We call them freezers. We don't think there's anything unnatural about it at all. Well, similarly, meat that is grown, real animal meat that's grown without animals, is still meat. And so there's questions about how it should be labeled. Should it be labeled any differently at all? Or should it just be called meat, which is exactly what it is? So government regulations and the cost of scale up, I think, are the two biggest things that are holding this industry back right now.
It's so funny that parallel, and I feel like we're on the other side of it, being those barons, but like now you laugh at the baron being like, that's so absurd. I would like to be on the non-absurd side of this story and just having my meat producer in my house, you know?
Oh, I like that, Allie. So that's really cool. Imagine, like, for example, if, you know, right now you go to your friend's house and she's got like a bread maker or an ice cream maker on the kitchen counter. It's kind of cool, but it's not really remarkable. Imagine if she had a meat maker. And she's just ordering like tea bags full of animal stem cells and putting them in, and you could grow your own meat right there. That is pretty awesome. I would be so thrilled to go to your friend's house and try that out.
Totally. And then it's called real meat. You were saying it's, if you're allergic, then you'd still react, right? But the mycoprotein that you're growing to or fermenting, it's allergen free, right?
It is, yeah. So there's no allergens associated with it. It's not made from animal cells. It's made from microscopic fungi. And it looks and tastes like meat, but it doesn't come from any animal origin. So if you were allergic to crab or lobster or whatever, you could still eat it.
And this blew my mind. I read that there's more fiber in it than oats.
Yeah, so the mycoprotein we make is like a real superfood straight out of the fermenter. So, you know, some people do farm to fork dining. We're doing fermenter to fork dining. And if you eat it straight from the fermenter, so nothing, we're not adding anything to it. There's no processing. This is a very natural food. It has more protein than beef. It has more iron than beef. It has more protein than eggs. It has more fiber than oats, as you point out. It has more potassium than bananas, and it naturally contains vitamin B12, which is absent in plant foods, but is present here because it's a product of microbial fermentation.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's like better for the planet, better for animals, and better for the people eating it.
Indeed.
I'm curious what drives you the most. Is it the sustainability, the animal cruelty, or the health part? Because they all seem great.
They are all great, Allie. You're right. Honestly, the animal welfare part is extremely motivating for me. I care deeply about animals, and I'm always horrified when I am reminded of what we do to them. And so I think that, you know, most people, like in future generations, are going to be horrified by what we did to animals, especially the animals who we raise for food. And I'd like to find ways to free humanity from this pretty bad practice. And so that's why that's what motivates me. But in addition, raising animals for food is also a huge problem for wildlife. It's the number one cause of deforestation on the planet. It's the number one cause of wildlife extinction on the planet. And so it's not just the treatment of the chickens and the pigs and the turkeys and the cows. It's also the treatment of wildlife. And so if you're concerned about nature or wildlife or even farm animal welfare, switching to non-animal meats is a very important thing that we can do. It's also important for other reasons too. So if you think about the pandemic that we are hopefully now coming out of, you see that the United Nations recently released a report. It's a report that's entitled Preventing the Next Pandemic. And the UN says in their report, they look at the top reasons why we may have yet another pandemic. So not the current pandemic, but we might have another pandemic. And number one on the UN list is increasing demand for meat. Number two is intensification of agriculture, so confining animals in tighter and tighter spaces because they are able to pass viruses back and forth so easily when they are beak to beak or snout to snout. And number three is the bushmeat trade, so killing wild animals for the meat. So if you think about that, the top 1, 2, and 3 reasons that the UN says that we may have yet another pandemic all relate to humanity's desire to consume meat. We have to find a way to produce meat without animals. It's not just better for them, which it is. It's not just better for the planet, which it is, but it's important for Homo sapiens too.
Yeah, it sounds like we're screwed if we don't fix it. And I also have something written in my notes, just bugs, which this is not fully formed. I came across a cricket-based protein lately, and the guy that made it was like, well, even if you're plant-based, they kill a ton of bugs to get the plants. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on like bugs as protein or as a part of sustainability?
Yeah, well, sure. It's certainly true that that agriculture harms insects. I doubt most people are basing their food choices based on what happens to insects. But I will say, if you're concerned about that, eating the crops directly is far better because you use far fewer crops. So it takes enormous numbers of crops of corn and soy that you're growing to feed farm animals. You funnel it through them. And if you just eat the crops directly, you can use far fewer acres. So if you really are concerned about insects, then I would recommend eating a plant-based diet so that you can reduce the amount of harm that you're doing to them. But the issue that you're talking about, additionally, which is farming insects, I'm less familiar with that. Most of the time that people are farming insects, they're not doing it for human consumption. They're doing it to feed to farm animals, like as an alternative to soy or wheat or corn that's being grown to feed them. So it's just a different, it's like a different situation. But my own anecdotal experience talking to people is that most Americans who I talk with aren't interested in eating insects.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it more of a cricket knee-jerk reaction than a lab-grown meat knee-jerk reaction?
Good question. That's a great question. I would love to know which people fear more. I don't presume to know the answer, but I would love it if there were some survey that indicated like a consumer willing to eat those various foods.
Well, when you talk to people though, is it fear or is it, I mean, you make a ton of good arguments, planet, for everyone and for yourself. There's health, there's planet, there's all this stuff. And then what do people just say? Like, nah, I don't know. Because that's what happens to me when I suggest a vegan restaurant, for example, with my buddies. They're like, or anecdotally, I've brought home vegan chicken nuggets. My friends eat them and they're like, these are great. Where are they from? I'm like, oh, they're actually vegan. And they're like, ew, I knew I didn't like them. It's that's that extreme. Yeah. I'm worried that you have to face that every single day.
Yeah, that happened to me too recently. So KFC now sells Beyond Meat chicken nuggets. And I brought them to some folks and said, hey, here's some KFC nuggets. And they ate them. I was like, what do you think? They're like, oh, they're really good. Mm-hmm. And then I disclosed that they were plant-based. And people were like, oh, I knew there was something missing. I guess it was embarrassing for them. So I think people will get over those hurdles, though, once more people are enjoying these foods. But to be honest with you, Max, I think as much as I wish that people based their food purchasing decisions on things like what you were just saying, like the environment or animal welfare or personal health, those aren't really the things that drive most people. Like most people choose foods because they like the taste and they think they're cost effective. Like that's really the top 1 and 2. Price is king, taste is king and price is queen. So right now, plant-based meat is getting better and better at competing on taste. The foods that we're making are getting better and better tasting. However, on price, it's still a different situation, that these products are still more expensive than conventional slaughter-based meat. And that's a problem. And so our industry needs to scale up so that we can bring costs down.
And what about animal products that don't actually murder the animal, like milk and eggs? Are there people working on that kind of substitute too?
Yeah, for sure. So, first, virtually 100% of the animals in the egg and the milk industries still go to slaughter plants. At the same time, now there's no retirement homes for them. At the same time, there are really cool companies that are doing that. So there's been an explosion in the plant-based milk space. So almond milk, oat milk, soy milk, coconut milk. I mean, it's like unbelievable how many choices there are now. And even in the egg space, there's been a rise in the last couple of years of a product that's called Just Egg, that is a really stellar egg replacer that is cholesterol free and tastes great. And it's sold in Walmart and everywhere else. So people who want to make like a scrambled egg or an omelet can use that product, and it's very good. And it's actually come way down in cost since it was released to the market. When it was released, I remember seeing it for like $8, and now the last time I saw it, it was $4.
Wow.
All right, driver. I mean, we're getting there.
Yeah, we're getting there. There's still a lot more to do, but we're moving. Yeah. We're moving.
I've been eating a lot of seitan and tofu lately because of this new switch. I'm just curious how the Microprotein compares to those two things, because I have a baseline after eating all of that.
So first of all, I'm a huge fan of both seitan and tofu, Allie. I love those foods. But very few people eat them and think, oh, I can't tell the difference between this and meat. It's a different product. Good. Like, I mean, I think it's good, but it's kind of like a new food to people. I liken it to, like, if you think about cheese, cheese is a relatively new invention in human history. Like, it took a long time. Even after we domesticated cows, it was still thousands of years before anybody figured out how to make milk curdle into cheese. It's not so obvious. And so, think about a few thousand years ago, prior to people having cheese, like, nobody dreamt about Gouda or Brie or Swiss or cheddar. These are like new experiences for humanity. And that's how I think of foods like tofu, is that it doesn't really taste like anything else. It's its own product. And I personally really like it, just like many people really like cheese. But if you ask somebody, what does cheese taste like? Well, it tastes like cheese. So it's a novel food. Whereas if you think about what we at the Better Meat Co. and other companies in our space are trying to do, it's to really mimic the meat experience. We want to create the meat experience without animals. So it's not necessarily new as much as it is the same thing, but better.
Yeah, interesting. And you talk about, like, it's a fraction of the water, land, greenhouse gases, time, which is crazy. Can you, like, give us a scale of how little that it takes to make this manufactured meat versus what we're doing now?
Yeah, assuredly, it's a minuscule, almost imperceptible fraction of what it takes, for example, to raise cows for food. However, because we're only running a pilot plant, we haven't actually conducted like a full-scale life cycle analysis because it's expensive. It's like $50,000 to do it. And we don't want to do it until we're actually scaled up, because we don't know. Like, there are certain processes that will be different at that point than what we're doing now. So I don't want to go out and tout what we're doing now when we know for a fact that it will be different at scale, and then we'll just have to do it all over again. But as you pointed out, Allie, like, the process takes mere hours, whereas cows take years. Like, this is a tiny little fraction. Like, it takes up nearly no land. It takes up just so few resources. And so we can convert microscopic fungi into meat in a very rapid way. And we know that it is dramatically better for the planet than to raise animals.
Yeah, interesting. And, I came across this too, that Clean Meat, your book, was bound in a lab-grown leather-bound book. Can you tell the fitheads about this?
Oh, wow. I'm so honored that you know about this, Allie. So, yes. So when I released Clean Meat, the book, there's a company that's called Geltor, and they made for it a lab-grown leather binding. And so the very first copy of the book was bound in lab-grown leather. So real leather, real collagen, just without animals. And we auctioned off this book. It's still, to this day, it's not only the first, but still only lab-grown leather-bound book. And we auctioned it off online for $13,000, and 100% of the proceeds went to a nonprofit charity called the Good Food Institute, which promotes this type of space. And so there's some lucky soul out there who has the only book that was ever bound in lab-grown leather.
That's so cool. The first one, too. So that's forever.
Yes. First and only.
I love it. And where can I find this now? As this is a self-serving question. Like, I would like to go out and replace what is in my fridge right now with Microprotein. Where am I looking?
There is one company that's dominant in the mycoprotein space. It's called Quorn, which is Quorn. And they have, right now about 100% of the mycoprotein market, to be honest with you. Then you have a number of smaller companies like my own, the Better Meat Co., which are working on scaling up so that we can mass produce and put our products into thousands of supermarkets as well. So if you're interested in trying mycoprotein, right now your best bet is getting Quorn, again, Quorn. But you can also try really great products from other dominant companies in the space that are using plants like peas, like, Beyond Meat is using peas to make burgers and chicken nuggets and so on. So those are good products to try too.
Solid.
And lab meat? Do we have to go to Singapore?
Max, I have made false predictions or predictions that turned out to be false on this. So I'm a little bit nervous ever about giving a suggested date at which it'll be on the market. I will say that one of the leading companies in this space, called Upside Foods, has produced a pilot plant in Northern California to manufacture this type of meat. And they spent $50 million to do it with the presumption that it will become legal to sell. Similarly, there's another company called Eat Just that's already selling it in Singapore, and they feel very confident that the United States regulators are going to give them the green light soon too. So if you were to talk to them, I bet they would say in 2022 they're going to be selling it. But I'm not going to make a prediction because I have been wrong, and I have been humbled by my incorrect predictions before.
Worst case scenario, we could just go to Singapore.
Yeah.
If you want, if you really desire
for a burger.
Lab meat tour. Let's go.
I have, it's funny you say that. I actually thought about doing it, but I have not.
I would click on that thumbnail
immediately.
I went to Singapore to try lab meat. Oh, that's irresistible. Come on, you got to do it.
The thing is, I've eaten it so many times just from these companies giving it to me, like privately, that
cool.
I had a hard time biting to say hundreds of thousands of dollars to do something that I've already done like 15 times.
Okay,
but
flex.
Yeah, that's easy.
But I did think about it just for like the bragging rights, like I thought
totally.
Just to brag about.
That's fascinating. And like, about how many startups are you seeing that are like sprinting on this idea?
Well, in the field of actually growing real animal cells, there's like over 100 of them now. And in the mycoprotein space, there's probably about like 15 or so startups in the space. And then in the plant-based protein, there's hundreds. And they're using everything from soybeans to fava beans to chickpeas. Like, they're all trying to do something different here. And so there's a lot of competition in the space. It's great. It's good for consumers.
Interesting. Yeah, it's crazy that about 100 companies are gambling on the fact that maybe the government will let us eat it once they get it going.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Allie. They are gambling.
But
they're right.
The weed companies all gambled on that too.
And now they're loaded.
Now they're loaded.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of meat companies that are like Kodak, where they just kind of have their head in the sand and they say, hey, we've been slaughtering animals forever. We're going to keep slaughtering animals forever. But I think there's also a lot of meat companies that are like Canon. And, Canon saw digital and they embraced it. And we all know what happened. Kodak went bankrupt, and Canon is now the largest manufacturer of digital cameras on the planet. So Canon is still selling us the same thing, the way to capture our memories, but they're doing it in a much more efficient way. And I think there are a lot of meat companies that are forward thinking, and they want to be like Canon and say, hey, look, we're going to continue selling meat. It's just going to be coming in from a more efficient process.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
It's the future. I can't wait.
The future is now.
Wait, what is your take? Because you've had this lab meat. Give your honest opinion. And is it different from tastings to tastings?
Well, I've tried it from a variety of companies, so it is different. But I'll say it tastes like meat because it is meat. It's not like if you eat a plant-based burger and you're like, oh, did they do a good job of making these soybeans mimic animal meat? It is animal meat. So it's not surprising that it tastes like animal meat, because that's exactly what it is.
Very cool. Love it. Okay, so where can the fit heads learn more about you and what you're doing?
That's very kind of you, Howie. So if you're interested in our company, The Better Meat Co., you can go to our website, which is just bettermeat.co. Again, that's bettermeat.co. And as you pointed out, we are hiring. So we'd love to bring on some awesome fit heads onto our team here in Sacramento. If you're interested in my book, again, it's called Clean Meat. You can purchase it anywhere books are sold, including on Amazon. But you can also go to the book's official website, which is cleanmeat.com. Again, that is cleanmeat.com.
And the vegan cookbook?
Very good, Max. So my wife, whose name is Okamoto, going to Amazon. She has several cookbooks on there. Check out Plant-Based on a Budget. That's her big one. So you can check that out.
Solid. Love it. Thank you so much. This has been quite enlightening.
Well, Allie, I know you're on day 61. I hope you get to day 601 very soon, and keep me posted, okay? I'm hooked on the narrative, so now I want to know what happens in the end.
Love it. Thank you. And thank you to the Fit Heads. If you can rate and review on Apple Podcasts, that helps us out a whole lot, and we will see you next week.